Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Sefer Divrei Hayamim Bet, the second book of Chronicles, Perek Chaf Ches, that is chapter 28. We are about to study the very sorry and disturbing and, frankly, evil career of Ahaz, King Ahaz. We just learned of the career of his father, King Yotam, who was a bit of a mixed bag, but at least for the most part, he was loyal to God. So the previous two kings had kind of, a mixed review, Yotam and his father Uzziyahu, but now we have King Ahaz, who is going to bring the level of spirituality and corruption to a unique level of lowness, of depravity. I know I just gave a little spoiler, but here we go. Ben Esrim Shana Ahaz b'malcho. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king. V'sheish esrei shana malach b'Yerushalayim, and his reign took 16 years. He was king in Jerusalem. V'lo asa hayashar be'enei Adonai ki David aviv, and he did not do that which was proper in the eyes of God as his ancestor David had done. Vayelech b'darchei malchei Yisrael, and he went in the ways of the kings of Israel. The kings of Israel, that of the northern kingdom, who were known, as we've seen, to be corrupt, idol worshippers, etc. And he went in their path rather than in the path that the kings of Judah were supposed to go on, as they were taught by their ancestor David. V'gam masechosa sola ba'alim. Not only did he go in their path, in his path of corruption, he made idols, just like masecha. A masecha is an image made of molten metal that he made la ba'alim for the Baal gods. The Baal gods, of course, those are the gods of the Canaanite god Baal, who we've read so much about in this book of Chronicles, and of course in the book of Kings, and so on. V'hu hiktir be'gei ben hinom, and he got to the worst level of idol worship is the sacrifice of human beings, and the sacrifice even of one's own children, something which we are warned against, deeply warned against in the Torah. He went down to that level. He brought burnt sacrifices in the Gei Ben Hinnom, in the valley of Ben Hinnom. The reason why the Gei Ben Hinnom became the word of Gehenna, which is the word in many cultures and languages is synonymous with hell, is because this valley is the valley in which what we are about to read in this verse 3, Vayaveret banav ba'esh, and he burnt his children, his sons, in the flames, kitoavot hagoyim, like the abominable ways of the other nations, those nations asher horish Adonai mipnei b'nei Yisrael, that God had dispossessed and gotten rid of from the land and replaced them with the people of Israel. He went so low as to go as far down in depravity as they did, and thus practiced child sacrifice. And because this horrific, this awfully violent and terrible act of burning children occurred in the Gei Ben Hinnom, this is why that valley achieved that unique and awful name of Gehenna, which is hell, because hell itself occurred there in that Gei Ben Hinnom, which is one of the valleys surrounding Jerusalem. Vayizabeach vayikater babamos, and he sacrificed and burnt on bamot, which are place altars of offering, val hagivot, and on the high places on the hills, v'tachat kol eitz ra'anan, and underneath every tree a tree with shade, with leafy shade. It seems like this was a place, we've seen this many times, where they would gather and do this idol worship. According to rabbinic legend and tradition, one of those children he wanted to burn was his son Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, who was saved by his mother. These are things that are within our tradition, not written here in the verses, but certainly would explain why Chizkiyahu, who is going to succeed his father, but I'm jumping ahead of myself, that's next chapter, turned the people back towards God and away from this abominable practice, being that he was almost a victim himself. And the Lord God, as a punishment for his awful behavior, God placed him under the hand of the king of Aram. So this is the beginning of the rise of the Assyrian Empire is in this period. And the king of Aram, that is the king of Assyria, as we'll see in this chapter and as we've seen many times. So he was now, he became a vassal to him by Yakubo, and the Arameans, i.e. the Assyrians, right, struck him, his people, the people of Judah, Vayishbumi menu shivya gedola, and captured many captives from Judah, Vayaviu Darmasek, and they brought him to Damascus. Begambi ad Melech Yisrael Nitan, and not only was he subdued under by the leaders of Damascus and Syria, he was also subdued by the king of the northern kingdom, who we'll learn soon. It was at this time was Pekach ben Remaliah. The northern kingdom of Israel was in its waning days at this point. Its king was Pekach, and who was the second to last king of the northern kingdom before it was subdued by the Arameans and the Assyrian Empire. Vayachbo Maka Gedola, and they struck him down a large defeat. So here we have Ahaz, again, because of his despicable behavior and because of his abandonment of God, God puts him under the thumb of the leaders of Damascus and the rising Assyrian Empire. When Ahaz was in Damascus, he had a chance to learn of the ways of Damascus, the ways of the Arameans, the gods of the Arameans, and the idol worship of them, which we'll see will bring him even further into the depths of darkness. Vayaharog Pekach ben Remaliah, who was at this time the king of the northern kingdom, Yehuda, he killed among the Judeans Me'avi Esrim Aleph 120,000 soldiers biyom echad in one day. Hakol bnei Chayil, all of them were soldiers. Bi'azvam es Adonai Aleavosam. And the reason why this happened in the theology of the Chronicles, it's a very simple tit-for-tat theology. You abandon God, therefore God abandons you and you get killed. Vayarog Zichri Gibor Ephraim, and Zichri, who was one of the heroes of Ephraim. Now, Ephraim is a name which, as we've seen many times in the book of Chronicles especially, is a term used to describe all of the 10 northern tribes, Ephraim being having become the most prominent among them. So not only did they kill many of the soldiers, they killed many of their leaders, including the following that are mentioned by name: at Maaseyahu ben Hamelach, Maaseyahu, who was the prince, the son of King Ahaz, Viet Azrikam Negid Habayis, and Azrikam, who was in charge of the king's palace, Vies Elkanah Mishneh Hamelach, and Elkanah, who was the king's top assistant. So, in other words, not only did they kill many soldiers, they managed to kill many of the top government officers and leaders of the armies. And they captured 200,000 women, children, boys, and girls. And they plundered much booty. And they brought all of this booty and all of these captives, women, children, captive soldiers, men, etc. They brought them all to Shomron, Samaria, which is the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. So in this terrible civil war, the people of Judah, now one will be thinking the northern kingdom was not exactly the most righteous either. It's not like you have the people of God fighting against the people that are against God. You have two groups of people that are fighting. Now, the people of Judah, God saw fit to punish them because they had turned away from God, and this is therefore being seen by the writer of the Chronicles as a punishment for their terrible behavior. But what of the north? What did they do right in order for them to merit this bountiful harvest of human beings? So we're going to see in a minute which that they're not so great either. So let's look at verse 9. So there's a prophet of God. There was a prophet of God whose name was Odeid. And as we see, there were prophets of God in Samaria as well. We haven't been focusing on them in the book of Chronicles, but we know from many of the prophets that some of them's job was to give prophecy to and to teach and to try to guide the northern kingdom. Unsuccessfully, the northern kingdom did not listen, and they ended up being destroyed. But here there was a prophet, Odeid Shemo. His name was Odeid. And he comes to tell the people the following. He comes to the army that is now on their way, marching towards Samaria, all laden with all of this booty that they just took from their brethren in Judah. He said, it was in the anger that God, the Lord of your fathers, had al Yehuda regarding Judah and their behavior in Nisanam b'yedchem. That's why God placed them in your hands. In other words, you won this battle not because you're so great, but because God wanted to punish them. So don't start being haughty and thinking, right? The reason why you killed them, it was in anger, because that anger had reached heaven, and heaven had decided it was time to punish the people of Judah. That's why you won. And now you want to take the people of Judah and Jerusalem, and you want to capture them and make them slaves and servants and maidservants for you. Right? You, right? With you, all you have is sins towards the Lord God. In other words, you are just as guilty as they are. You are full of sin just as they were. If you take advantage of them as if you somehow deserve to be overlord over them, right, and to take their things, the same fate will befall you. And now, so listen to me. Return the captive that you captured from your brethren, because God is angry at you. Don't think you're so great. You didn't win this battle because the gods, so to speak, and certainly not. That's gods with small g, for those that, or God with a large G, capital G, right? Because he thinks you're so great and wants you to win over them, right? He just decided to make you the instrument of punishment for them. But don't go ahead and take advantage of them. So therefore, Vayakuman Hashimei Rashev Ephraim, people from the heads of the people of Ephraim, and remember again, Ephraim refers to all of the tribes, the northern tribes that are part of the northern kingdom. Azaryahu ben Yehochanan, Berachyahu ben Meshilemos, Vichizkiyahu ben Shalom, Va'amaso ben Chadloi, Al Haboim Minat Sava. Right? These the leaders, the heads of the people of Ephraim. And the impression we get is these are the political heads, not so much the military leaders. Confronted those who were returning from the fight, from the front, right, and bringing all these captives. Vayomer lahem, and they said, "Lo taviu et hashivya, don't bring all these captives here. Kila ashmat Adonai aleinu atem omrim." Right, all. You're planning on doing what you plan on doing. In other words, bringing these people here is going to make us sin, add to the sins that we have against God. You'll just be adding on all the sins and the offenses that we already have. We have so much to repent for. There is so much guilt that we already have. Acharon hafal Yisrael. There's already so many reasons for God to be angry at Israel. Remember, the northern kingdom at this time was also already suffering heavily under the yoke of the rising Assyrian kingdom in the north. And they have been told by Oded and the other prophets and leaders that they were suffering because of their behavior. So we don't need any more, right? So take these people back. So the armies, the people that were soldiers, right, they abandoned, in other words, they gave up the captives and the booty. They gave it to the political leaders and the congregation. In other words, they did not keep them. And the people that we mentioned before got up, and they took control over the captives, and all of their those that had no clothes, hilbishu min hashalal, and they gave them clothing from the booty that had been taken. Vayalbishum, and they dressed them. Vayanilum, and they gave them shoes. Vayachilum, and they gave them food. Vayashkum, and they gave them drink. Vayisuchum, and they smeared them. They gave them medicines for their wounds. Vayinahalum b'chamorim l'chol koshel, and those who were injured and wounded and could not walk, they gave them donkeys and led them with donkeys. Vayevi'um yirecho, and they brought them south to Jericho, Yericho Ir Hatmarim, which is known then, and it is still known today, the city of dates. Eitzel Achehem, back to their brethren by Yashuvu Shomron, and then they returned back to Samaria after returning their brethren. So here we see the idea that this glimmer of good behavior on the path of the people of Israel. Pekach ben Remalyahu did not completely fall to the Assyrian Empire. It was his successor, a generation later, that did. Maybe not quite a little bit down the road. Maybe this is what allowed the northern kingdom to last a little bit longer. That's the impression we get from the book of Chronicles. Although Chronicles does not focus very much, this is one of the few places where they focus on happenings in the northern kingdom. For the most part, we focus completely in this book on the southern kingdom. The happenings in the northern kingdom we do learn out in much more detail in the book of Kings, which we, fortunately, all of us on this podcast have studied together before. So they brought them back to Shomron. Lesson being, don't think you're so great. Just because you had a victory doesn't mean that you're great. Sometimes God might use you as an instrument of punishment against someone else, but don't think if you let that get to your head, then you're going to end up being the one punished. So don't let it get to your head. So now, Bo'esahi in this time, and we've learned part of this story in the book of Kings, and we learned a little bit in the book of Isaiah as well, how Ahaz decided that he was going to, in order to get out of the hands of the Assyrians, he was going to ally himself with them. Maybe if he pays them off, pays tribute to them, starts acting and worshiping like them, maybe he can be on their side and somehow gain by working with them. Of course, we know from the book of Isaiah that he was advised that this is a stupid idea, but Ahaz didn't listen. So Ba'esahi, in that time, I'm reading verse 16 now, Shalach melech hamelech Ahaz al Malchi Ashur la'azor lo. Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria and asked them for help. We know from other parts that the help that he wanted was help against the northern kingdom, as we just learned before, of the challenge from the northern kingdom. But he needed help from other quarters as well. V'yod adomim ba'o, who was being attacked by the Edomites, or later to be known as the Idumeans, so he's getting hit from the south. Vayaku v'Yehuda, and they were striking against Judean towns, Vayish Bushevi, and capturing captives. And he was also getting hit from the west, the southwest. Uflishtim pashtu bi'arei Ashvela, the Philistines were coming back. The Philistines that were subdued by the previous kings are now arising back to power and taking advantage of Judah's weakness and attacking the lands of the Shephelah, of the lower plains, the Negev, and the Negev region, Yehuda, which was part of the kingdom of Judea. Vayil Kedu et Beit Shemesh, and they had captured many towns, Beit Shemesh, Vet Ayalon, Viet Hagiderot, Viet Socho, Uvenosea, Viet Timna, Uvenosea, all these towns and their outlying villages, Viet Gimzo, Yesmenosea, Vayeshu Sham, and they were settling the towns of Judah that they had captured. So he's getting a hit from all sides, because God had brought Yehuda down, had humbled them, because of the terrible behavior of Ahaz, the king of Israel. Interestingly, Ahaz is here being called the king of Israel as opposed to the king of Yehuda, and we've seen that several times because, of course, they are also part of the people of Israel, which now includes these two nations, the northern kingdom and the southern. Why was God punishing Ahaz? Because he had torn Judah apart, right? Torn them apart, here specifically referring to torn them from God, and had rebelled against God. Vayavo alav, so while being hit from all sides, from the northern kingdom of Israel, from the kingdom of the Philistines, from the Edomites in the south, right? Now the big guy, Vayavo alav Tilgas Pilneser Melech Ashur. Now, Tilgas Pilneser is the same guy as Tiglas Pileser, who comes by various names, the king of Assyria, Vayotzar lo, and he waged a siege against him, and he made it trouble for him. He hurt him in battle, Velo Chazako, and didn't give him strength. In other words, Ahaz reached out to him for help, but instead of getting help, he got attacked. Ki cholak Ahaz es beis Adonai, because Ahaz had in his tribute to the kingdom of Assyria, in his attempt to buy friendship, Ahaz had taken apart the house of God, the temple, via Beit HaMelech, and the king's house, via Hasorim, and he had taken money and goods from all of his nobles. Vayitein lemelech Asher, and he gave a huge tribute to the king of Assyria, v'lo le'ezralo, but it did not help him. Instead of saying, oh, he paid me off and he's trying to ally himself with me, and I'll work with him, Tiglas Pileser, the king of Assyria, came and attacked him anyway. Over Esat Serlo, and at the time of being attacked, instead of recognizing his bad ways and turning to God and turning the people back to the right path and repenting, instead, Vayosef Limol Badonai, he continued to rebel against God. Hu HaMelech Achaz. This is the kind of person King Ahaz was. Vayizbach, and what did he do? Instead of turning to God, right, he said, well, hey, if those guys are more powerful than me, I'm going to turn to their God. Vayizbach lelohei dar mesek hamakimbo. He went and he brought sacrifices to the gods of the people from Damascus who were striking against him. Vayomer, because his logic went as follows. He said, Ki Elohei malchei aram heim mazrimotam. Why are they beating me? Must be because their gods are more powerful. So lahem azabeach v'yazruni. I'm going to go and bring sacrifices to them so they should help me, just like they helped the people of Damascus, without recognizing that his mission as the king of Judah and the king of Israel is to be devoted to the God of Israel. But he did not get the message, and he just got worse and worse. And those gods, in other words, the worship of them, ended up being that which made him stumble and all of the people of Israel stumble into a terrible, terrible path of destruction. He gathered more and more of the vessels from the temple, and he chopped up and cut down the vessels of the temple, and he even closed up and locked up the temple. People shouldn't pray there. And instead he made altars all around in every corner of the street in Jerusalem, another altar to the gods of Damascus. And in every city within Judea, at least the one still under control, he made even more altars, all for the purpose of sacrificing to these other gods. And of course, this angered God, the Lord of his forefathers. And if you want to read more and more about the details of Ahaz, his career, his and what he did as king and what happened, Harishonim v'Achronim, early in his reign and late in his reign, Hinam Ksuvim al Sefer Malchei Yehuda v'Yisrael. You can go ahead and read the history books that record the events of the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. We know that Ahaz did not fall to the Assyrians. His son Chizkiyahu, in the end, had the ultimate military encounter with the Assyrians, and almost fell to the Assyrians, which we will read about, of course, in the upcoming chapters. But for now, Ahaz, Vayishkav Achazim Abosav, Ahaz laid with his fathers. In other words, again, the similar euphemism as we've seen over and over again, passed on to the next world. Vayikberu va'ir b'Yerushalayim, and they buried him in the city in Jerusalem, as opposed to in Ir David, Kilo Haviyu L'Kivrei Malchei Yisrael, because they did not bring him and bury him next to the kings of Israel because of his behavior. There's a lot of traditions we find in the Talmud and rabbinic traditions about how Chizkiyahu did not give his father an honorable burial. We see little hints of that, and this is the origin of those traditions of how they did not bury him in an honorable place with the kings. Vayimloch Yechizkiyahu v'no tachtav, and Yechizkiyahu, Hezekiah, his son, became king in his stead. So this concludes the awful career of Ahaz. We will soon read the very encouraging and inspiring, at least in the beginning and for the most of Chizkiyahu's career, when he tries to restore and bring the people back to God. Ultimately, Chizkiyahu himself, I don't want to give away too many spoilers. We've studied the career of Chizkiyahu in the book of Kings together. We studied it in the book of Isaiah together. We'll get a little bit of a different perspective here in the book of Chronicles. One of the most eventful and important kings is about to come. For now, that is the end of the reign of Ahaz, the sorry reign of Ahaz. Thank you so much for studying this together with me. Looking forward to studying the next chapter, the story of Chizkiyahu, and the rest of the book of Chronicles together. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.